You're listening to the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Bill McIntyre, and it's time for this week's Long Island News, the show that talks to newsmakers and other important people from Nassau and Suffolk County that matter to Long Island and Long Islanders like you. So each week we'll have a conversation about issues that affect all of us. I live on Long Island just like you, and I want to know more about the people making the big decisions that affect all of us. Well, this week I'd like to welcome to the show for the first time Nassau County Legislator and Republican Patrick Mullaney. Mr. Mullaney is a former US Marine Reservist and a 19-year veteran of the New York City Fire Department. Welcome to this week's Long Island News.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I guess I should update my bio. I now have 20 years in the FDNY. But thank you for having me.
Wow, 20 years. Okay, so now you represent the 4th Legislative District. What towns does that cover?
That covers the entire Barrier Island, which is made up of Atlantic Beach, Long Beach, Lido Beach, all the way to Point Lookout, as well as I go further north into Island Park, cover about half of Oceanside, and then a small section of East Rockaway.
Right. Now, in my mind, the picture I see in my mind is summertime in your district.
Absolutely.
And it's a zoo. It's got, the traffic, the beach crowds, it's like being out, I guess, in Southampton or East Hampton, where those people have that seasonal thing. During the summer, they're jammed, and then in the winter, they get their town back.
I would love to agree with you. And being a resident of Long Beach for about 30 years, 20 years ago, I would have agreed with you. Now, it's more of a year-round community.
Right.
I can't speak so much to maybe the opposite ends, whether it be Atlantic Beach or Point Lookout. I think they're still more seasonal.
Right.
But when it comes to the hub, the center of the Barrier Island, Long Beach is still.
It's kind of the way it evolved, though, right? The original houses down there were all these little huts where people would come from other places and stay for, a month and go swimming and then go home. And then they started to winterize those houses so that people could stay all year.
My wife would say, even when I first moved to Long Beach in the mid-'90s, West End Bungalow was a small, like you said, bungalow, never really meant to be inhabited year-round.
Right.
Eventually, people put heat, maybe a second bathroom. But she would say, November, December, you would see tumbleweed, blowing the actual tumbleweed. People would board up their houses. She was a Bronx native, and the last day of school, her parents would pick her up at school. She'd get in the car in a school uniform. They would drive here.
Right.
They'd drop it off at the cleaners, and they would pick it up the day before school started, so she would never see her house in the Bronx.
What a great memory. That's,
absolutely.
Yeah. Wow, that's really cool. All right, so now I touched on some of your history. And
yes.
20 years in the fire department. Are you going to be one of the ones I did my 20 and I'm...
Absolutely not. If I have my say, I'm enjoying it. It's a fantastic job. It gives me good interaction with the public. It's a nice separation from this new position. Right. In Nassau County. The two worlds are very different.
Oh, I bet.
Hard to navigate at times, going from the firehouse to whether it be a legislative meeting or an event.
Yeah,
but it's nice to have it.
One of the things we don't always talk to candidates or politicians about is,
I have to get used to being called that, by the way.
Yeah, I'm sure. But the effect on your family. Now, you're already a New York fireman, which means you would go to the firehouse and be gone for 4 days.
Really only 2 days.
Okay.
This morning would be a perfect example. I left my house, we're going to say about 7:30. I'll be home tomorrow night about 11 o'clock.
Wow.
So I'll come out. I have a few legislative things to attend to today. I'll go to the firehouse tonight, work tonight and tomorrow day. Only allowed to work maximum of a 24-hour shift. That's a...
oh, really?
That's a safety standard.
Okay. When did that, did it change?
Every department's a little bit different depending on the needs.
Okay.
The FDNY is staffed enough that, and busy enough that you really don't want anybody working more than a 24-hour period.
Right.
So as to affect your psyche, physically, you'll, it becomes a safety issue.
Yeah. Well, and there's something I'd like to say to the listening audience in that vein is the idea that, all of Long Island's firemen are volunteers.
With the exception, Long Beach has a paid department.
They do now,
yes.
Huh? Yeah. My dad was a I'm talking back 1964 and, up. And they're hurting now. They need people. So any of you people that are out there that are interested in firematics and learning, all that stuff, call up your local fire department and ask them if they're looking for volunteers.
I think a lot of people, unfortunately, don't even know that it's there anymore. You know, our society has kind of shifted where community service isn't as valued as it used to be. Where it was much more common for people to be not even just the volunteer fire service, but whether it be your local Kiwanis Club, your Lions Club, right. Knights of Columbus, if you will.
Yeah.
All those numbers we're starting to see.
They're all trying to survive.
It's unfortunate, but I think it's a product of our isolation and less. You know, you would be a more familiar sight would be when you drove home from work, maybe again 20 years ago, to see people out on their front lawn just talking with their neighbors.
Yeah.
And we don't really see that as much.
I don't see kids playing stickball in the street like we did.
No.
You know?
No,
right?
we don't. Showing
my age. So anyway, you know, we talked about some of your history. Anything else that you want to touch on?
No, like I said, like we had spoken about before, I am a native of Nassau County. I was born and raised in Malvern, then bounced around, moved to Long Beach in the mid-'90s. I was a Kellenberg Memorial graduate, Nassau Community College. I'd love to say that I fulfilled that obligation in 2 years. I want to say it was probably closer to 7. But
you did it.
But I did it. I was very happy.
Amen.
And then moved on to Queens College and joined the FDNY in 2004 and have always held a second job. The FDNY permits, doesn't necessarily permit it as much as it kind of encourages it.
Just facilitates it too.
Yeah, facilitated.
Yeah.
So the scheduling just worked better. So whether it was I was a contractor for years and then I did home inspections and, odd things here and there in between. But that's basically my history.
Right. Okay, so now how long have you been a legislator? And actually, what made you want to do that in the first place?
So I was elected last November. I succeeded Denise Ford, who held the seat in the 4th Legislative District for 20 years.
Wow.
Sadly, in a strange world, Denise's husband was an FDNY firefighter who was killed on Father's Day in 2001 in the company that was right down the road from my company. So our paths, I've always been, an admirer of Denise. And just to have that even in the background was kind of like I said, it was just ominous, not ominous.
Uncomfortable?
No, not uncomfortable, just made it maybe a tighter bond.
Oh, okay.
So I've been a legislator now for, 7 minutes, 8 minutes. I was elected in November. So for about 5 months.
Right.
And it's been fantastic.
And that's a 2-year term?
It's a 2-year term. I never really had any political aspirations. It just wasn't something that was necessarily on my radar. I've always been interested in people, like we had spoken about, you and I were talking about prior. Find people very interesting. I am interested in just society in general and some of the issues that we face. I believe that we face a lot of obstacles that necessarily aren't political, that are more social, such as not talking, not being outside, not interacting with each other. Anyway, that being said, my wife and I were actually both interviewed as potential candidates, not knowing what the position was, just, names come up. I'm finding this out now in hindsight that this is the process. And I have to imagine they wanted my wife more than they wanted me. How many, middle-aged, bald, white, average-looking guys do you want? She's an attractive woman, very successful, much more outgoing than me. But after they were asking us different questions, as soon as they were finished, and they were like, "What do you think?" My wife immediately says, "I am out. I have no interest in this, but I 100% think Pat should do it." And everything I've always been interested in now, in hindsight, has kind of pointed to something like this.
Right.
So I gave it a shot.
Yeah.
And I was proved to be successful last November, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't enjoying it.
Right.
I really am.
Well, it could be the intersection of a lot of your interests if people is the thing you're interested in.
You can leave this part out. I'm a talker, so you can learn this if you wanted to. In high school, my junior year, I quit the football team to do the musical in high school. Yeah, it always gets a good laugh.
I'm a musician. I get it.
So you can imagine the disappointment on my girlfriend's face when she's like, "Oh, the captain of the football team is now, he's going to quit." I don't want to date the lead in the drama club.
Unless you were really good in the show.
And it turned out to be great. But I've always, again, looking back, I've always kind of embraced that being a little bit uncomfortable. And I like the change.
Right.
Like shake things up. And then see, where the...
yeah, well, that's kind of right up there with the only time you really learn is when you make the mistakes. When you do everything right, who's going to ask?
Life's really not fun.
No.
Just given a playbook and you follow it.
sheet music, Here you go. Count to 4. And
Yeah.
the band's off. Yeah.
So
I get that.
everything's kind of,
But you never would have gotten that if you hadn't taken that opportunity when it occurred. It's not like you're going to be a senior for 10 years and you're going to get. So I do it now or I never do it.
I try and stress to my kids. They're older now. Just do it. If somebody asks you to do something, obviously safety is a consideration. I don't want to sound irresponsible, but just do it. You very rarely do you regret the things that you've done. Yeah. You more often regret the chances that you didn't take and the opportunities you didn't.
It's amazing how, in this day and age, how careful we have to be about what we say because people will take it. 50 years ago when you bought a car, they gave you a manual on how to adjust your valves. Now we sell hair dryers that tell people not to use it in the shower.
The very first thing that says if you buy a car battery, don't drink the fluid. I'm going to turn this microphone off for a second. I'm just kidding.
No,
but we've allowed that, right? It's our generation. I don't blame anybody else except for myself for allowing, maybe not that directly, but a lot of the problems we see right now.
Yeah, but education, I think, is probably the pivotal one. It's the big one.
And education, on two fronts.
Kids don't know don't know how a bill is formed and how it's made. We don't know those things.
Some would argue that's by design.
Oh, I kind of think I'm leaning to that.
Maybe not. I think you also are forced to keep people's interest. Mm-hmm. So I know when I was in school, once you saw that video of how a bill becomes a law and it would bounce up the steps.
Oh, yeah, it was snooze time.
I was immediately asleep.
Yeah, right. But if they had Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson come in the classroom and do it for you.
Yeah, maybe.
That might have been a little, but yeah. I don't know. It's again, I go with George Carlin. He said, you go out in the street and take the average man. That's the 50th percentile. That's the guy in the middle. He's not a genius. And then the realization that half of the country is below him, not above him. And now we have to try to, I don't know, infuse on a population things that we all took for granted when we were growing up.
We always do.
You held the door for the guy behind you. That wasn't a question. You didn't do certain things, and we all agreed silently that yes, that's.
Well, it was the norm, right?
Bingo.
Everything from somebody sneezes, God bless you, was a knee-jerk reaction to holding the door to.
Bingo. Yep.
Just had that conversation with a friend of mine this morning. In the movie The Bronx Tale, that was the test on whether or not a date liked you, was whether or not they would lean over in the car and unlock your door.
Yeah, right.
So I can keep me on track, will you? Because you can see I'll start going off into different sections.
I'm the same way. So we could do 5 hours here, but anyway, let's go to the next. I have a thing here. Interesting to note, Newsday endorsed your competitor in the race,
yes.
Right? Democrat Alexis Pace. And how did that make you feel? And what do you think was the key to you winning the race?
When I was first considered to be a candidate, one of the questions that they asked me was, are you thick-skinned? Do things bother you? Now, we're obviously on the radio, but you can see me and judging just from the way I look, I don't have a choice but to be thick-skinned. Also being the FDNY, it can be a tough crowd. So my answer to that question was yes. So when Newsday did not endorse me, I didn't really bat an eye. If you have no expectations, then disappointment, is not that common. So I was fine with it. Yeah. It was what it was. We were both, either one was an incumbent. We both were newcomers. So now you have no track record to run on, right?
Right.
So now
it's a head-to-head battle.
It's a head-to-head battle, and they're judging you off of an opinion or an idea. So I was fine with it. It didn't really resonate at all. I think I was very lucky. I think I was a combination of just, my campaign, and I was helped a tremendous support staff. Mm-hmm. By the way, I was helped. That was probably instrumental, probably the most in me being successful. I also believe that our society was ready, ready to start seeing a little bit of a change.
Right.
And maybe I resonated that change with them. I had Denise's support all the way up to Nassau County was tremendous for me, Long Beach.
Right. You're listening to this week's Long Island News on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Bill McIntyre, and my guest today is Nassau County Legislator Patrick Mullaney from Nassau's 4th District. Now, some big events happening here in Nassau County. I spoke to the police commissioner about 2 weeks ago, and he went through the whole litany of the cricket
Oh,
thing.
that
And
poor Commissioner Ryder he's got his work cut out for him.
Oh.
He's a tremendous work ethic. He's doing a fantastic job, and this was just.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, we're going to set up
By the way, we're going to throw one of the largest
35,000 seat stadium.
I was told that is bigger than UBS and the Coliseum combined.
Yes.
I don't know if I believe that.
It is. It's hard to believe.
It's very hard to believe.
There's more people could fit in that stadium than could. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know. Stadiums are an interesting thing, just as a conversation piece. What's going on with stadiums. It's a big it's a big transfer of money from one to the other, and I don't think anybody could follow the books. I
wouldn't know. I'm even fascinated by what you're saying right now, Mike. I'd be curious. I'd be curious to further this conversation, but I don't even have any.
I've heard it said that it's the new way to get private money or public money into private pockets because of such transfers of property, and and it's kind of hard to follow.
Kind of hard to follow that thread. I'm going to be curious. I might afterwards take a note and kind of look into that. It's an interesting theory.
There's another one you can, and I have a brain like you. I step into the tulips, and I think I did an interview with somebody just a little while ago, and we were talking about people who are in foster care. And the minute they turn 18, now some of those kids were getting Social Security benefits. Mm-hmm. The state is taking those Social Security benefits. Those kids never got penny one. State took the money. And then when they turn 18, you now have a new homeless person on the street. Because I was stunned to hear that, and nobody in any state that I've ever heard of has ever mentioned that this is a revenue stream.
It's very sad the way our social services are set up. They do a great job, very understaffed, but the way it's structured just for that. Like you think about how much money's coming into it. That's not making its way. Yeah,
one kid was expecting, I don't know if he really expected it, but he said it's like $72,000 he was supposed to have.
Oh, wow.
State took it, gone. And, and to wake up to that and realize the situation he's in now, that might have helped him a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Get a leg up, you know? That, to me, those are the things, those hidden things that none of us are really aware of or see. That's what has to come out to the light.
That's one of the reasons why I'm so interested in this role is now get to really kind of see how things work. So to peel back the onion.
Yeah.
Be like, okay. And a lot of things are, right, that makes sense. I didn't know.
Right.
A lot of changes. People ask me, are you able to do this? Are you able to do that? I'm like, Nassau County is a big ship.
Oh, yeah.
So to try and affect any change, and understandably so, I think it's by design. It's a lot of change you want to be slow.
Especially when people hear one thing and they start screaming. I heard a great quote. I had to memorize it because a little knowledge results in stubborn certainty. A lot of knowledge may result in an open mind.
I like that.
We hear one thing about a guy and all of a sudden he's no good. And I think a large portion of the population operates exactly that way.
You're ruining my closing point. I believe most people now look at life with a confirmation bias, and they look for things that just confirm a preconceived belief that they already had. Whether or not they're cognizant of it, we're doing just that. And what happens is we're not interested in the full story. We're just interested in the blurb.
That works for us. Piece the thing that works for us. Yeah.
Just backs up a belief or a point that we're trying to make.
Yep. So true. But again, and we go back to it, education. People constantly talk about critical thinking. And I like to remind them that one of the ingredients of true critical thinking is to entertain the idea that you could be wrong at least once while you're going through the litany of things that tell you you're right.
I would add, not challenge, but I would add to your point, we lack major communication skills, right? We have, remember that used to be the 2-year college associate's degree. That's what it was in.
I did 4 in speech communication, rhetoric, and performance. Yeah.
The majority of communication, at least 51%, I used to say this to my kids, is listening.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And we don't listen.
Well, because the definition of communicate is to transfer, transmit, and receive. Everybody's busy transmitting.
Of course.
Who's listening? Well, not many of us.
That's my job now.
You're right.
In a government position, my job is not to really speak; it's to listen.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's. I'm going to push this forward. Just really quick. A hot topic that we talk about often on the show is the Sands deal for the Coliseum,
the casino. Yes.
Do you know what the latest is on that from the legislative perspective, or?
They're putting downstate casinos in. Correct. Nassau County is going to compete for that license.
Mm-hmm.
They want that license to have the casino here. Now, I know that people who are against it have their reasons, but the benefit to Nassau County financially, economically, is too big to just push it aside and say, all right, then we're not going to do it.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And some of the numbers, that's what I have here. $5 billion privately funded project, 8,500 construction jobs, complete union built, right? 6,000 careers just in operations. And the list is endless, and I'm sure you know all this, so I don't need to beat a dead horse.
One of the things, one of the interesting things that came up, it was a Newsday story, I guess 2 or 3 days ago, was the idea that the legislature is actually approving payments after they've already been made, that the paperwork didn't kind of keep up.
Not in regards to regards to the sand, or you're talking about just in regards to...
The Sands was one of them, but it was basically they were talking about lawyers that the county has, engaged to do their business. They're getting paid and they're all cashing checks.
I could be wrong, and this is where, again, being brand new, I don't believe that they've been paid.
Okay.
I believe that they've started working.
Okay.
Without the contracts necessarily, and I could be wrong, being approved, but no payment has been made because that needs to go through us.
Yeah, well,
right before any money is passed.
But I think that's the reason the story was written.
Of course. But I think the facts, like we were talking about earlier, is somewhat. It's a key component. No payment has been made.
Right.
No one has been paid, so they're working.
Right.
Under the premise that they will be paid.
They will be paid. Right.
But no money has been transferred.
That's been transferred.
Until that comes to, that would be illegal, I believe.
Right. I have just really one more question. As a Republican, I'd love to ask you, how do you feel about the Republican Party running a convicted felon for the office of president?
Talk about a loaded question. Wow. I would really question that whole case, because just because now somebody's a convicted felon, they get a certain title. They're automatically put into a room with other convicted felons. When are we even going to challenge how we got there? Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I know it's a different discussion.
Here's my thing. If I had 12 friends of mine over my house and we were hanging out and somebody said, hey, let's go to lunch. Mm-hmm. How long do you think it would take me to get those 12 people to agree on a place of where to go and even when? It takes a long time.
Of course. I understand. And I understand the point that you're looking to make.
12 people got together that don't even know each other. And on 34 counts, each one of them said guilty.
Each one of them said guilty.
That amounts to 408 times in one sitting.
Absolutely. And again, I would challenge.
And this didn't take weeks.
No. I would challenge not the people, the information, the way the information was, whether it was withheld or the way it was presented, get the design of that system. I was disappointed with the outcome of that case on multiple fronts. The fact that it even made it to where it did, right? Because now all of a sudden is everybody else who potentially could be held accountable for their actions now going to be brought up to speed. Maybe this isn't a good example, and maybe this is bad politics. Again, I would challenge, going back to what I said earlier, I would challenge the decision that got there. There's no time. There's not enough time now.
So you have a problem with the case being done in the first place?
I do.
Okay.
And I also believe that we're no longer, especially in a public court, which that's what we have now, where now a lot of times we're guilty until we're proven innocent.
Oh, well.
And I think that it's a hard point to argue.
You can't ride herd on public opinion. You really,
and public opinion, and we could, if given a little bit of time, even a few minutes, just with a couple of Google searches, we could see where public opinion held a heavy sway in a court case. One of the reasons that I do like being involved in government is just because something is legal doesn't mean it's right.
Oh, moral and legal don't necessarily.
So that lends to, and I'm not saying anything that he did was morally right or wrong. That's not the point I'm trying to make. I just think that in order for political benefit, because there was a huge political component to this, obviously he's a former president, potential candidate.
Yeah. This is the least of the charges too. He's got 54 others remaining that blow these out of the water as far as seriousness.
So, and we'll see. And we'll see what happens.
Yeah. But, see, there's an old saying, and people use it all the time. Those who fail to learn history are doomed to repeat it. Right? I have an addendum, because those who learn history are doomed to repeat it. It doesn't really matter whether you don't know it or know it. The other thing is there are people who are learning history in order to avoid the pitfalls that first occurred for things we did before. Let's try not to let that happen. There are others who read that same history in an attempt to make those things happen.
Yeah, I think human nature is human nature, right? To add to your point, I think there are certain things that we're just going to do. You know, one of my favorite lines comically comes from an action movie in the mid-'90s, and it's the second Terminator movie. Mm-hmm. When the young character asks Arnold Schwarzenegger, Terminator character, he goes, there's no, this doesn't end well for us, basically, and I'm paraphrasing.
Right.
And his line is, it's in your nature to destroy yourselves. That's kind of what you're saying, is like, are we set up to do this?
Yeah.
Biologically.
Well, I think if human nature runs its natural course, because, it's funny, Margaret Mead said this when they asked her when she was digging things up, what was the first sign that you saw that let you know that there was civilization back here? What did she say? You look like
No, you say, go ahead.
She said, I found a skeleton with a healed hip bone. And they said, well, what does that got to do with it? And she said, well, that tells me that the people around this person took care of them. Compassion showed that this is civilization, empathy and compassion. And today we seem to downplay those things. Somebody shows compassion, we call them woke or a snowflake. They show empathy for somebody else, we think they're weak. The old saying, never say you're sorry, it's a sign of weakness. And that's BS. I think it's a sign of courage. If you have the guts to tell somebody you were sorry, that means you're putting yourself out there. To run away from it is what's weak.
I would agree with you. I think, but that's also owning yourself. I think a lot of that, what are you apologizing for?
Oh, well,
that becomes part of that discussion then too.
Yeah, definitely. Well, someday we're going to sit down someplace and talk, okay?
I'm in.
Because I'm coming up with things I can think of.
No worries.
I would love to get your take.
I'd like to be as open as possible.
And again, you have to promise you'll come back. That's the other thing,
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. You know where we are now, so there's no.
Getting here, I will have a complaint between the construction, the lack of one-way signs that nobody's following, just getting here. It's a good thing I got here an hour and a half before my...
He wants to know, you're a legislator, can you fix that?
Yeah, that's the school.
That's a big thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, my guest today has been Nassau County Legislator Patrick Mullaney from Nassau's 4th District. And again, thank you for taking the time to be here today to speak with us. But the clock on the wall says it's time for this week's Long Island News to get on out of here. I'm Bill McIntyre. Remember, you can listen to us by searching for this week's Long Island News wherever you listen to podcasts. And we're right here every Friday at 3 p.m. on the radio on the voice of Nassau Community College 90.3 WHPC.